The Galactic Council took humanity erased 2,000 years of diplomacy. Part 1, the tribute we never agreed to. The message came through while I was speaking. Not during a break. Not at the end of my sentence. It arrived while the words were still in my mouth, mid-thought, mid-breath. In the chamber of the Galactic Council, where 200 years of human patience had earned us exactly one seat at a very long table. I am Deathworlders. I have been Earth's senior ambassador to the Galactic Council for 11 years. Before that, I spent 9 years as a junior delegate, and before that I trained for 6 years just to learn how to walk into a room full of alien species without showing fear on my face. I know how to be calm. I have practiced calm the way other people practice instruments or fighting. Calm is my profession. The message destroyed it in 4 seconds. It came from Deputy Coordinator Nora Ali, who runs our station communications. She sent it as a priority flag, which meant it pushed straight through my earpiece in the middle of the council floor. I heard her voice, quiet, controlled, but tight in a way that made my stomach drop before she said a single word. Dara. The Vorath delegate filed an accord 6 hours ago. The Juvenile Integration Accord. It's already been countersigned by 9 species. Under Council procedural law, human silence during the filing window counted as consent. 47 children were collected from the education exchange program on station Valorous this morning. They are on a Vorath transport. The ship is already moving. I stopped speaking. The chamber was enormous and very quiet. The way only a room full of alien beings can be quiet, different lungs, different rhythms, 100 small sounds that were not human but filled the air all the same. Every eye, every sensor, every attention organ in that room turned toward me when I stopped. The Vorath delegate, whose name translates roughly to something like first speaker of the patient tide, sat 3 levels above me on the curved council tiers. She was tall, gray-skinned, with 4 arms folded in what I had learned meant satisfaction. She looked at me the way someone looks at a person who has just realized a joke that everyone else already understood. Ambassador Voss, she said in the common tongue that the council's translation network pushed into my ear. You appear unwell. Please take a moment. She knew. She had known before I did. The accord had been filed while our station was in a communication delay window, a gap of just under 2 hours that occurs when the council station swings behind the gravity shadow of the nearby gas giant. It was not an accident. Nothing the Vorath did in that chamber was ever an accident. I took one breath, then another. Then I looked up at her. Delegate, I said, I require a full copy of the Juvenile Integration Accord filed this session, along with the timestamp of ratification and the names of all cautioning parties. Of course, she said, and there was warmth in her voice. It is a great honor for your species. Human children are considered highly adaptable. They will learn much from the Vorath homeworld's academic institutions. This is how deep bonds are forged between peoples. The other delegates murmured, some in agreement, some in what I recognized as discomfort. The Silhuri delegate, old, slow-moving, representing the oldest species in the council, did not murmur at all. She sat perfectly still in her carved seat and looked at me with an expression I could not read. I requested an immediate recess. The council granted it. The moment the chamber doors closed, behind me, Nora was at my side. She handed me a physical printed sheet. She had anticipated that I would want something I could hold. I looked at it. 47 names. Real names. Children between the ages of 8 and 12, who had been enrolled in an exchange education program that was supposed to give them a chance to learn alongside alien students, supervised safe, scheduled to return home in 4 months. The youngest was 8 years old. Her name was Lily. She was from a town in northern England, and she had listed her favorite subject as drawing. I had 30 seconds of something that was not calm. I gave myself exactly that long. Then I called Earth. The person who answered was Deputy Director Oliver Grant, who runs Earth's Interstellar Affairs Office. He was already awake, which told me everything. He had been waiting for my call. The expression on his face was one I had never seen from anyone in that office before. Every ambassador knows there are levels of seriousness in government. There is concerned. There is grave. There is the face that means the conversation happening right now will be in history books. Oliver had that face. We know, he said. We've been tracking the transport since it cleared the station perimeter. Dara, bring them home. Every single one. I don't care what it costs us at that table. Oliver, if we push this wrong, we lose the seat entirely. 2 centuries of. I know exactly what 2 centuries of work looks like, he said, and his voice was quiet and absolute. I also know what 47 children look like. Bring them home. I sent one message to the Vorath transport before I went back into the chamber. It was short. It said the children taken from station Valorous are to be returned immediately and unconditionally. Failure to comply will result in humanity's formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council. The response came back in 11 minutes. It was 3 lines. It said that humanity's emotional response to standard cultural integration procedures was noted. It said that the children were in excellent hands. It said that the Vorath looked forward to many years of close partnership with Earth once this period of adjustment had passed. They sent a laughing tone marker at the end. It was the Vorath equivalent of a smile. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked back into the chamber, took my seat, and asked the council floor for recognition. The Vorath delegate looked pleased. She expected a speech, an appeal, more patience. I looked at her, and then I looked around the chamber at the Silhuri delegate who had gone so still she barely seemed to breathe, at the 9 species who had cautioned that accord, at the dozens of others who were watching with careful eyes. The Galactic Council is hereby formally notified, I said in the clearest voice I had ever used in that room, that the United Earth government is initiating withdrawal proceedings effective immediately pending the return of 47 human children currently aboard the Vorath vessel designation 947. The chamber did not murmur this time. It went completely silent. And in that silence I understood something I had never fully felt in 11 years of diplomacy, that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can say is the thing that cannot be taken back. I remember thinking as I walked back to my office to write the formal withdrawal Notice that 2,000 years of human diplomacy had taught us one iron lesson. Words only matter when someone believes. You will act on them. The Voreth had made one very large mistake. They had assumed we wouldn't. Part 2. What withdrawal actually means. Most people think that when a nation withdraws from a diplomatic body, there is a process, forms, meetings, a period of negotiation where calmer heads talk the original party back from the edge and everyone shakes hands and the withdrawal is quietly shelved. They are not wrong. That is usually what happens. I am Commander Priya Anand, tactical officer aboard the Earth ship Resolute. And I can tell you from personal experience that what happened over the next 72 hours was not that. I was on the bridge when the word came through from the council station. Ambassador Voss had filed withdrawal papers. The actual withdrawal wouldn't activate for 48 hours under council procedural rules, but the intent was real, and it was on the record. Every species in the council had received the notification. I watched the communications board light up incoming signals from 6 different council member species, all flagged priority, all addressed to Earth's diplomatic channels. Our captain, Owen Hartley, read the summary and set it down on the console. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Well, I suppose we find out who we actually are." The first thing Earth did was shut down the relay network. This sounds small. It was not small. Over a period of 160 years, human engineers had built and maintained a network of faster-than-light communication relays that connected 17 council species to each other across distances that would otherwise take months to bridge. We had built this because it was useful, because it created goodwill, because it was the kind of patient, generous work that made the council take us seriously. We ran it because it was right. Within 4 hours of the withdrawal notice, every relay in that network went dark. I watched the effect on our long-range sensors. It was like watching lights go out across a city, one by one, in a spreading wave. 17 species suddenly found their communication lanes collapsing. Not cut, just gone. The infrastructure that carried their messages simply stopped responding. The Voreth had not considered this. I know they hadn't, because their reaction was immediate and loud. The delegate sent 3 separate messages to Earth within the first hour, demanding that the network be restored. She called it sabotage. She called it a violation of council infrastructure agreements. Earth's response was calm and factual. The relay network was human property, built with human resources and maintained by human workers. With humanity withdrawing from the council, those workers had been recalled. The network would remain offline until the situation was resolved. The second thing Earth did was pull the medical ships. The Resolute was not the only Earth vessel operating under council mandates. There were 9 others spread across 3 active conflict zones where minor species had been fighting over resource boundaries for decades. Earth's medical ships had been working in those zones under council humanitarian agreements. They were not warships. They carried doctors and supplies and portable surgical equipment. They had been there for years. Every one of them received the same recall order within 6 hours of the withdrawal notice. They left immediately, without ceremony, without any handoff of care to other parties. They simply moved toward the nearest jump point and departed. I heard later that the Voreth delegate called this inhuman. The word choice was apparently not intentional, but several other council species noticed the irony. The third thing was quieter, but I think more significant. Earth began pulling its people, not just diplomats, the scientists who were running joint experiments on 8 different council research stations packed their equipment and requested transport. The engineers who had been maintaining life support systems on 3 colony platforms gave their notice and walked out. The teachers who had been running cross-species education programs, the same kind that had provided the children the first place, simply stopped showing up. One station in particular became something of a symbol, though no one intended it that way. There was a joint research platform called Confluence 7 orbiting a dim star near the council's outer edge, where a team of human biologists had been working for 40 years on a treatment for a disease called hollow lung syndrome. It was a disease that killed young Voreth children specifically. It collapsed their breathing capacity over about 3 years. It was slow and painful, and it had no cure. The human team had been 40 years into a project that was, by most estimates, 2 to 4 years from completion. They packed up and left. I don't know who made the decision or what it felt like to make it. I know that when I heard about it on the bridge, Owen went very quiet and stared at the navigation console for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "I hope they understand what that means." I didn't ask him to clarify. I understood. The Voreth publicly dismissed all of this as a bluff. Their statement, issued through the Council's official channel, said that humanity needed the galactic community far more than the galactic community needed humanity. They cited trade volume figures and our relatively small military capacity and the fact that we had only been council members for 2 centuries, which by galactic standards made us new arrivals, barely out of introductions. Several other species agreed, not out of agreement with the Voreth exactly, but out of a genuine belief that no junior species would truly sever its most important diplomatic relationship over a procedural misunderstanding about a cultural exchange program. They had, I think, never actually paid attention to what humans are like when someone takes their children. It is a strange thing to observe from the outside. I have watched crews handle emergencies. I have watched people under pressure, under danger, under conditions that would break most individuals. I have seen fear, and I have seen bravado, and I have seen the kind of performance that comes from training overriding panic. What I watched over those 72 hours, the behavior of every human I could observe on my ship, across communications, in the movements of the fleet, was none of those things. It was stillness, not the stillness of people who are waiting to see if a threat is real. The stillness of people who have already decided. One incident made it specific for me. A Voreth patrol vessel on what was almost certainly an authorized reconnaissance mission came within 1,200 km of Earth's lunar defense perimeter on the second day. 1,200 km is close. It's inside what any tactical officer would call the engagement consideration zone. Under normal protocols, a vessel that close would be hailed, identified, and given a course correction advisory. Our perimeter station did hail it. The Voreth vessel did not respond to 3 hails. The perimeter station did not escalate. It logged the contact, maintained its position, and continued monitoring. I watched this exchange on our sensors, expecting tension, expecting some kind of reaction from my crew. Instead, the officer on my bridge who was tracking it, a young woman named Claire Dobbs, 2 years out of academy. Normally the kind of person who taps her foot when she's nervous, sat perfectly still and watched the Voreth vessel complete its pass and depart. Then she said, quietly logged in, noted, and went back to her regular scans. I realized then that I wasn't afraid either. I had been waiting to feel afraid, waiting for the part where my training kicked in to suppress it, and instead, there was simply a clarity that sat in my chest like a stone, heavy but not unpleasant. The kind of feeling that comes when a decision has been made so completely that anxiety has nowhere left to land. Meanwhile, back at the council station, Ambassador Voss was dealing with a different kind of pressure. She had been formally stripped of her council credentials on the 28th hour. Under withdrawal procedures, she no longer had observer status, speaker status, or the right to request the floor. She was technically a foreign national on a station where she no longer had diplomatic standing. She did not leave. She sat in the outer waiting area of the main chamber with a data pad and a cup of tea and responded to every council administrative notice with polite acknowledgement. When a council clerk came to inform her that her presence was now irregular, she thanked him kindly and asked if there was a specific rule requiring her to vacate the premises within any particular time period. There wasn't. Not technically. The council's rules had never anticipated a species that would refuse to leave while simultaneously having no official status. She stayed. I heard about this on the bridge and I laughed for the first time in 3 days. Not because it was funny exactly, but because it was so completely recognizable. That is what humans do. We find the gap in the rules that lets us remain exactly where we need to be. The 48-hour mark arrived. The withdrawal became active, and the Voreth had not returned the children. I looked at our course display. The fleet dispositions that had been quietly shifting for the past 2 days were now visible to anyone paying close attention to long-range sensors, not pointed anywhere threatening, not in any formation that screamed aggression, just present in places that mattered. I have been in space long enough to know that silence from humans is not surrender. It is the moment before we figure out exactly what we are willing to do. And as I looked at the display and at the quiet faces of my crew, I understood that we had already figured it out. We were just waiting for the Voreth to understand it too. Part 3, the shape of a species. Cornered. I have spent 30 years explaining humans to species that think they understand them. My name is Elias Vaughn. I hold the title of Senior Xenopsychologist at the Council Advisory Bureau, which is a position that sounds more impressive than it is. In practice, it means I write reports that policymakers read selectively and act upon only when the conclusions confirm what they already believe. I have published 11 papers on human behavioral patterns in high-pressure situations. I have given 43 lectures to council delegations on the subject of human cultural psychology. I have been called the galaxy's foremost non-human expert on humanity, which is a title that humanity itself would find both amusing and slightly insulting. Today, I am writing a report that I have titled simply this: They Are Not Bluffing. I want to document what I am observing because I believe it is important, and I believe it is being badly misread by nearly every species currently watching these events unfold. Let me begin with what I am not seeing. I am not seeing chaos. When a species is pushed into a corner, the common behavioral pattern across most council members involves escalating internal disorganization, arguments about strategy, public disagreement between factions, visible fear responses. In the civilian population, leaders speaking in competing voices. I have documented this in 6 different species across various historical crises. It is a reliable pattern. I am not seeing it in humans. What I am seeing instead is something that took me several hours to correctly identify because I was looking for the wrong signals. Humans in this situation are quiet. They are organized in a way that does not announce itself. Their public statements are brief and factual. Their internal communications, what I can observe through the council's monitoring channels, show no panic. What they show is logistics. Supply chains are being rerouted. Human colony platforms in exposed orbital positions near Varath controlled space have been quietly moving population to deeper, more sheltered stations. Dead instruments. There are 14 species that owe significant trade credits to human corporations are being called in. Not loudly, not with demands. The calls go out and the repayments start arriving, and no one who wasn't paying close attention would notice. Someone has been planning for this possibility. I do not know for how long. I suspect it is longer than the Vorath would find comfortable. On the 6th day, the Vorath offered what they described as a generous compromise. The delegate announced through official channels that the children would be returned after a 1-year cultural adjustment period during which they would receive the finest Vorath education available and be treated with complete respect and care. She said this as if she were presenting a gift. Her body language, as far as I can read, Vor physical communication, indicated genuine confusion about why this would not be received warmly. Earth's response was delivered by Ambassador Vor from her unofficial position in the Council's outer waiting area where she had now been sitting for 6 days. She sent it as a formal written communication to the Council Secretary, who was obligated to distribute it to all member delegations. It was 3 words, that is insufficient. I read those 3 words and sat back in my chair for a long time. There is a kind of statement that contains more information in its brevity than a long speech ever could. I have studied human communication for 3 decades, and I know that when humans stop explaining, they have moved past the part of the process where explanation is the point. I called a colleague of mine, an older researcher named Dorothy Hill, who has spent her career specifically on human responses to threats against children. She is perhaps the only person in the Council's academic community who has written more about this subject than I have. Elias, she said before I could finish describing the situation, listen to me. There is a concept in human psychology called the parental override. It is not unique to humans. Many species have elevated protective responses toward their young, but in humans it sits in a particular relationship to everything else in their psychology. It does not merely elevate their protective response. It suspends almost all other social calculations. Suspends, I repeated. Trade relationships, diplomatic history, risk assessment, long-term strategic planning, all of it goes into a kind of secondary processing. It doesn't disappear. Humans are still thinking about those things, but they are no longer the primary calculus. The primary calculus becomes simply recover the young. And here is what I want you to understand, Elias, because I do not think the Council fully grasps this. She paused. It is not unique to parents. Humans extend this response to the category of children in general. It is not about whose child. It is about the fact of a child being in danger. I thought about Lily, the 8-year-old from northern England. I had read the names in Ambassador Vor's dossier. 47 of them. None of the Council delegates who had co-signed the accord had read those names. I was fairly certain of that. I asked Dorothy what she thought the Council should do. Return the children immediately, she said, and then find a way to apologize that humans will actually consider meaningful, not a procedural apology, a genuine one. And if the refuse. She was quiet for a moment. Then I think they are about to have a very educational experience about what it means to make an enemy of a species that has been practicing patience for 2 centuries and has now stopped. I wrote this into my report. I wrote all of it, including the part about the children's names and the parental override and the way human logistics were moving with a quiet precision that should concern every member of this council. I submitted it through official channels. I also, while I was at it, quietly filed a personal relocation request to move my office to a human-administered research station at the council's far edge. Some professional detachment has its limits, but what troubled me most, what kept me up that night running through behavioral models and coming back to the same conclusions, was not the human response itself. I had anticipated something like it. What troubled me was what I had found in the historical archives when I spent 2 days pulling records of every significant conflict humanity had ever had with another spacefaring species. There were not many. Humanity had been careful. Humanity had been, for the entirety of its council membership, a model of restraint and patience and diplomatic good faith. But before the council, before the formal years of interstellar relations, there had been 2 incidents. Neither was well known outside of specialist research circles. The records were not classified, but they were old and not widely read. In both cases, a species had made what they considered to be a calculated move against human interests in a moment of perceived human weakness. In both cases, the species had completely misread the situation. Neither species was part of the Galactic Council today. One of them no longer existed as a unified civilization. I want to be careful in how I say that. They were not destroyed. They survived. But the civilization they had built, the governance structure and the trade empire and the territorial reach they had been so confident in, was simply gone. Dismantled not through violence, primarily but through a sustained, patient, methodical human response that had taken 12 years and left nothing structurally intact. The other species still existed as a culture but had lost every piece of territory they had held outside their home system. They had been there for 1,000 years. It took humanity 9 years to end their expansion. I found one account from a historian of that era who had interviewed human policymakers years after the fact and asked them why they had been so thorough. The answer was given by a man named George Calloway, who had been the lead strategist for Earth's response and who, by all accounts, was a quiet, thoughtful man who had spent his career in economic planning and had no military background whatsoever. He said, "They took something of ours. We took everything of theirs that wasn't nailed to gravity well. We did it slowly, and we did it completely, and we made sure they understood why. Then we stopped. We don't enjoy this. We don't want to be this. But we need the lesson to stay learned." I read that quote and then I looked at the current situation. 47 children. 48 hours of silence already converted into action. An ambassador still sitting in the waiting area with her tea and her data pad. A fleet moving into positions with a quiet, purposeful grace that I had not fully appreciated until I looked at the map. I went back to my report and added one final paragraph. It said this: the Council should understand that it is not dealing with a species that is choosing between war and peace. It is dealing with a species that has already chosen recovery of its children as the absolute priority, that is, pursuing that goal with every tool available to it in a specific sequence. And that is, and this is the critical point, still hoping that they will make a reasonable choice before the sequence completes. The window for that reasonable choice is not infinite. Based on behavioral modeling and historical precedent, I estimate it is measured in hours, not days. I submitted the report at 2:00 in the morning station time. 3 council delegates contacted me before dawn requesting urgent meetings. The delegate was not one of them. Part 4, 12 hours. They gave us a deadline. I am Daravor, and I find it worth noting, in what I intend to be a permanent record of these events, that they issued their ultimatum on what they chose to call a deadline. The irony of that word, given what followed, is not something I will pretend I missed. The ultimatum arrived through official council channels at 6:00 in the morning station time on day 9. It said that if Earth did not formally re-ratify the Juvenile Integration Accord and resume council membership within 48 hours, 14 species would implement coordinated economic sanctions against all human trade interests across council space. It listed the sanctions in specific detail. It was clearly the result of significant behind-the-scenes coordination. They had spent days building it. I read it carefully. Then I read it again. Then I forwarded it to Earth with a single line of context, see attached. Earth's response came back in 40 minutes. It was also short. It said, our deadline is 12 hours. Full return of all 47 children. Unconditional. The clock starts when you receive this message. I personally delivered Earth's response to the Council Secretary at 7:00 in the morning. The Secretary, a small, quiet being, called Vel, who had served in that administrative role for 60 years, read it twice and looked at me with what I had learned to recognize as genuine distress in a still face. Ambassador Vor, Vel said carefully, you are still technically not authorized to conduct official business on this station. I know, I said. Please log it anyway. Vel logged it. The word spread through the council station within the hour. I know this because I watched the hallways change. The council station is a large place. More than 4,000 beings of various species live and work there on a permanent basis, with thousands more passing through on any given day. It has a specific rhythm, a pace that I had learned over 11 years, the way you learn a person's breathing. When something significant happens, the rhythm changes. People move differently. Conversations stop when certain people walk by and resume the moment they pass. By 8:00 in the morning, I could feel the station holding its breath. I was asked through 3 separate intermediaries to meet with various council delegates who wanted to discuss the situation. I agreed to meet with 2 of them, not the ones who had co-signed the accord, the ones who hadn't. The first was Ambassador Prail, representing a species called the Haven, who are small and fast-thinking and have a talent for reading situations that borders on something I can only describe as instinct. Prail met me in a corridor outside the Eastern Observation Deck. She did not sit down. She looked at me for a moment with her wide amber eyes, and then she said, "How serious is this?" It was not a question. "You already know," I said. "I want to hear you say it." "We are not leaving without those children," I said. "There is no version of the next 12 hours that ends with 47 children still on a Vorlog transport." She nodded slowly. "Then I will be abstaining from any further sanctions vote. I am telling you this now so that my position is clear before any vote occurs." She paused. "I am also, for the record, going to recommend to my government tonight that we renegotiate our communication relay contract directly with Earth rather than through the Council's infrastructure committee, assuming there is an Earth relationship to renegotiate with after today." Assuming I agreed. The second meeting was with 3 delegates at once. They represented species that had not co-signed the accord and had been quietly uncomfortable from the beginning. They wanted to know if there was anything they could do. I told them that the most useful thing they could do was make their discomfort with the accord officially known in the council record, and that they might also consider where they wanted to stand when the session opened that afternoon. They asked what was going to happen at the afternoon session. "I am going to read some names," I said. They did not understand what I meant. That was fine. They would. The council session opened at 2:00 in the afternoon. I had been formally re-granted temporary observer status. Vel had apparently found a procedural mechanism that allowed this for parties with active interests in items currently before the council. I have never in my career loved paperwork more than I did in that moment. I requested the floor. I was granted it. I stood up and I looked around the chamber at the Vorlog delegate in her elevated seat at the 9 co-signatories at the others, at Velen, the secretary's chair, at the recording systems that would archive everything said in this room, and I opened my data pad. I would like to read a list of names Into the council record, I said. These are the names of the 47 children. Currently aboard the Vorlog vessel. Designation 947. I ask that this record stand permanently in the council's archives. I started reading. The first name was Ben Harris, 10 years old, from a coastal town in Wales, who wanted to be an architect. Then I read another name. And another. I did not rush. I read each name clearly, and then I read the age and the home and the thing they had said they wanted to do with their lives when they grew up. Some of them wanted to be scientists. Some wanted to be builders or artists or doctors. One 12-year-old named Nina Gray wanted to be a council diplomat, which she had apparently said during the application interview for the very exchange program that had brought her to Station Valorous. I read for 40 minutes. The Vorlog delegate interrupted me 11 minutes in. She said my behavior was irregular and emotionally manipulative, and that the council's time was being wasted. I stopped reading. I looked at her. Then I looked at the council secretary. Vel said quietly and precisely, "The ambassador has been recognized. She may continue." I continued. At minute 23, something happened that I had not expected. One of the 9 co-signatories, species called the Vethra, who are not known for emotional displays and who had co-signed what they described as a routine procedural agreement without fully reading it, went very still. I watched the delegate's body language shift from restless to something that looked in Vethra terms very much like discomfort. At minute 31, the Vethra delegate quietly signaled the secretary that they wished to formally withdraw their co-signature from the accord, citing incomplete review of participant details. This was under council rules. Technically possible this late in the proceedings only under specific conditions. Vel found the conditions. Of course Vel did. 2 more co-signatories withdrew before I finished reading. I read the last name, Lily, age 8. Drawing Northern England, and I closed my data pad. The chamber was silent. I looked at the Vorlog delegate. She had 4 arms and was holding all of them very still. The satisfaction that had been written across her posture for 9 days was gone. In its place was something I recognized. Across species lines, the look of a person who has just understood that they have made a mistake they cannot argue their way out of. "Delegate," I said, "our deadline is now at 7 hours and 12 minutes. The children need to begin their journey home in that time. I would strongly encourage you to contact your vessel." She stood. She said loudly and firmly that humanity was behaving irrationally, that the accord was legal, that the children were safe, that Earth's threats were empty and embarrassing, and that the Vorlog would not be dictated to by a species that had been in space for barely 2 centuries. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I waited. The Vorlog delegate paused. She had expected a response. I gave her none. "This council," she said, turning to address the broader chamber, "should recognize that Earth is in violation of." "Delegate," the voice that interrupted her was not mine. It was old and slow and came from the highest tier of the chamber, where the silvery delegate sat in her carved chair. She had not spoken once during the entire 9 days. Every head in the chamber turned toward her. "Sit down." The Vorlog delegate sat. The Silhuri delegate looked at me for a long moment. Then she said to the chamber at large, in a voice that had seen 1,000 years of council sessions and had the weight of all of them behind it. Contact the vessel. Return the children. Do it now. No one in the chamber argued with her. I stood and walked to the exit. Behind me, I heard the beginning of what sounded like a very urgent Vorlog communication attempt. The delegates' voice dropping low and fast, the tone of someone who has just begun moving quickly to correct a very large error. I did not smile. I did not feel relief. What I felt was something closer to the exhaustion that comes after a great effort, and beneath it the steady, hard certainty that this was not over yet. Not until I heard 47 voices on a confirmed communication link telling me they were on their way home. My earpiece clicked. It was Priya Anand on the Resolute. Her voice was completely calm. Dara, we're tracking a change in the Vorlog vessel's heading. It's turning around. I kept walking. Good, I said. And 6 hours and 41 minutes later, every single child was confirmed aboard an Earth transit vessel heading home. Part 5. What remains after the talking stops. I am Dora Vess. This is the debrief I requested be entered into Earth's permanent diplomatic record, unedited in full. I asked for this because I believe what happened over those 9 days should be understood correctly, not as a victory, not as a failure, but as a moment that revealed something true about who we are and what we have built, and at what cost and to what end. Let me start with the children. All 47 came home. I want that sentence to exist before anything else in this account, before the analysis and the aftermath and the long complicated months that followed. Ben Harris came home. Nina Gray came home. Lily came home. All of them scared, tired, angry in the particular way that children are angry when adults have failed them badly, asking hard questions that did not have comfortable answers. They came home to parents who had not slept in 9 days, to towns and schools, and drawing classes and half-finished homework, to all the ordinary and irreplaceable details of a life that had been briefly and brutally interrupted. They were not harmed. I want that to be on the record too. The Vorlog had kept them in appropriate conditions by any clinical measure. They had been housed in clean spaces, fed correctly, supervised carefully. In the Vorlog worldview, they had been treated well. I believe the Vorlog genuinely did not understand what they had done. That misunderstanding was, in some ways, the most dangerous part of all of this. The Vorlog capitulated within 4 hours of the session that I have already described. The vessel turned around as Commander Anand confirmed, and the children were transferred to an Earth transit ship that had been waiting, not coincidentally, less than 3 hours away, at a known neutral waypoint. The transit ship had been positioned there for 6 days. Earth had arranged it before I finished reading those names into the record, before the session even opened. They had been waiting for the moment they would need it. That is the part the Vorlog never understood. They had been watching the surface of what Earth was doing, the relay shut down, the medical recalls, the personnel withdrawals, and they had interpreted those actions as pressure tactics, bargaining chips, things that would be reversed when a deal was struck. They were not bargaining chips. They were the first moves in a sequence that had already been planned to its end. The Vorlog fleet assets that had moved toward human-adjacent space during the standoff returned to their home orbits quietly over the next several days. No confrontation occurred. The Earth fleet elements that had taken up their positions, including, I was later told, a significant force that had staged just outside Vorlog home system detection range, stood down and dispersed in an equally quiet way. No shots were fired. I think it is important to say that clearly. No one died. No vessel was destroyed. The thing that humans are most capable of, the thing that other species most misunderstand about us, is not our willingness to act. It is our precision about when to stop. The aftermath was complicated. 7 council species suspended diplomatic relations with Earth. Several of them released statements describing human behavior during the standoff as reckless, disproportionate, and dangerous to galactic stability. They were not entirely wrong about any of those things. Earth's withdrawal had destabilized the relay network and left genuine humanitarian gaps in the conflict zones where our medical ships have been operating. People had suffered because of our absence. That is a fact I carry with me, and I think anyone who tells the story of those 9 days should carry it too. We did what we believed we had to do, and the cost was not borne only by the Voreth. 3 other species, 2 of which had co-signed the accord and then withdrawn their signatures, and 1 who had never signed it at all, requested expanded diplomatic ties with Earth in the weeks following the standoff. They did not say this openly. They reached out through quiet channels, through trade representatives and cultural exchange coordinators, and the kind of back corridor conversations that diplomatic work is actually built on. What they were saying beneath the official language was that they had watched Earth carefully for 9 days and had decided that being close to us was better than being distant. That is a very specific kind of respect, and I'm not sure it is the kind we should want, but I understand why it exists, and I think we have to make peace with the fact that being willing to act always changes how others see you, even when you act correctly. The Galactic Council restructured in the months that followed. The Juvenile Integration Accord was repealed entirely. This happened faster and with less opposition than anyone expected, because once the details of the accord were publicly and clearly described, once the council members who had co-signed it were asked to explain on the record what exactly they had agreed to, several of them appeared genuinely surprised by the specifics. The accord had been written in the dense procedural language that Voreth favored, and more than one delegate had signed it, without fully parsing what cultural integration of juvenile representatives actually meant in practice. I do not offer this as an excuse. I offer it as a data point. The Galactic Council, for all its centuries of operation, had a serious gap in its review processes for accords affecting non-consenting individuals. Closing the gap became the primary work of Earth's diplomatic mission for the 2 years after we returned to the table. We did return to the table. I want to be clear about that. We went back. Some people on Earth thought we shouldn't. There was significant public opinion in the weeks after the children came home that the council was not worth the investment, that 2 centuries of patience and Careful work had been repaid with exactly this, a legal mechanism used to take children, and that the lesson was obvious. The galactic community did not respect us, and we should stop pretending otherwise. I understand that argument. I held it myself briefly somewhere around hour 30 of those 9 days when I was sitting in the outer waiting area, with my tea getting cold and my credentials stripped in a council that had voted unanimously to censure us. But I kept coming back to something that the Silhuri delegate said to me on her last day before retirement, a month after the standoff ended. She passed me in a corridor, walking slowly with the deliberate care of someone who has been alive for a very long time and has learned not to waste energy on rushing. She stopped. She looked at me. "You chose the harder thing," she said. I said I wasn't sure what she meant. "You came back," she said. She meant to the table. She meant to the work. She meant to the long, frustrating, imperfect, necessary project of building something with species that do not think like us and do not always act well and do not always understand what they are doing when they hurt us. I thought about that for a long time. There is a version of this story where humanity takes the lesson of those 9 days as a permission structure, where we decide that the only language the galaxy understands is power, and we orient ourselves accordingly. We have the capacity for it. The 9 days demonstrated that clearly enough. We could become a species that others fear without reservation, and in the short term that would probably get us what we wanted more efficiently. I do not want to be that species. I do not think most humans do. I think that is something that often gets lost when people talk about what humanity demonstrated in those 9 days. Everyone focuses on the fleet movements, the relay shutdown, the precision of the response, the moment the Voreth vessel turned around. And those things matter. They are real, and they were necessary. But the thing I think about most when I sit with those 9 days is a letter I received from a 12-year-old named Yusuf Holt 2 weeks after he came home to his family in Manchester. He wrote to my official office address in neat handwriting on actual paper, which he apparently thought was the appropriate way to write to an ambassador. He said he wanted to thank me. He said he had been scared during the journey on the Voreth ship, but not as scared as he probably should have been. And he had been trying to figure out why. He said he had thought about it a lot, and he had decided it was because he always knew someone was coming. He didn't know exactly how he knew. He just did. Then he asked me how I knew they would get there in time. I wrote back to him. I used my personal stationery, not the official kind, and I wrote by hand, which I am not practiced at and which took 3 drafts to get right. I told him the truth, which was that I didn't know. I didn't know if we would get there in time. I didn't know if the Voreth would capitulate or dig in further. I didn't know if the council would hold together or fracture entirely. I didn't know if the decisions Earth was making would work or would cause more harm than good. What I knew was that we had to try. All of us, the fleet, the diplomats, the workers who shut down the relays, the scientists who packed their equipment, the medical crews who followed recall orders, even though it was one of the hardest things they had ever been asked to do. We all had to try with everything we had without certainty of success. That is not the same as knowing, but it is the thing that moves you Forward when knowing is not available. Yusuf wrote back one more time. He said that was a good answer. He said he thought he wanted to be a diplomat after all, even more than he had before, because it sounded like a job where you had to keep trying even when you didn't know if it was working. He is correct. It is exactly that. The Galactic Council is an imperfect institution. It is slow and procedurally dense and influenced by species interests that are sometimes incompatible and occasionally selfish, and have, as recently demonstrated, a real capacity for doing serious harm while believing themselves to be acting appropriately. It has failed us. It will probably fail us again. We sit at the table anyway. Not because the table is fair. Not because the other species always act in good faith or understand us correctly, or treat our children with the care they deserve. We sit at the table because the alternative, a galaxy where humanity is separate, where the channels of communication are closed, where misunderstandings accumulate in silence until they become conflicts, is worse. We sit at the table because someone has to be the species that keeps showing up, even after the hard days. Because the work of building something better between peoples who are genuinely different from each other is long and costly and full of moments that feel like failure, and it still matters. It still has to be done. And because, and I think this is the thing the Vorath understood too late, and the Silhuri delegate understood before anyone else, there is something more powerful than a species willing to walk away. It is a species that has proven beyond any doubt that it will walk away if pushed to that edge, and that still comes back. We came back. We always come back. But they know now with perfect clarity what sits beneath this table. And they know that we know it too. And somehow in that shared knowledge, there is the beginning of something that might, over centuries and setbacks and more hard days than I can count, become the thing we have been trying to build all along. Something that deserves the word. Together, I am Deravos. This is my record. Let it stand.